hard enough. The truth is they settle. They decide that comfort is more attractive than growth, and they build an identity around playing small. Think about it, human beings are wired for survival, not fulfillment. Our nervous system is designed to keep us safe, not to make us extraordinary. Safety is comfortable. Safety feels good in the short term, but safety kills dreams. Comfort zones are like invisible prisons. You decorate the walls, you make it cozy. You even tell yourself you're happy there, but deep down, you know you're settling for less than what you're capable of. Why do people stay in jobs they hate for 10, 20, 30 years? Why do they stay in relationships that drain them? Why do they set the same New Year's resolutions every single January and break them by February? It's not because they can't change. It's because change is uncomfortable. Growth is uncomfortable. Growth requires pain. And if you're not willing to trade short-term comfort for long-term fulfillment, you'll always stay stuck. The reason the top 1% break through is not because they're superhuman. It's because they've learned to recondition their nervous system to see discomfort as progress, to see pain as a signal that they're stretching into a new level. Most people run from discomfort, but the greats run into it. They've wired themselves to understand that growth and comfort do not coexist. Now here's the trap. Comfort is seductive. Comfort tells you you're okay. Don't push. You don't need to risk it. You're fine where you are. And people buy into that story. But comfort slowly robs you of hunger, and hunger is the ultimate fuel. When you get comfortable, you lower your standards. And once you lower your standards, your whole life begins to shrink to meet that level. Think of anyone who's achieved mastery in their field. They're obsessed. They don't settle for good enough. Comfort to them feels like death. But the 99%, they settle because the pain of pushing feels greater than the pain of staying the same, at least in the moment. See, you've got to understand something fundamental. Your brain is always making calculations about pain and pleasure. If it associates more pain to change than to staying where you are, you'll never change, even if staying where you are is destroying you. That's why people smoke, even though they know it can kill them. That's why people procrastinate, even though they know it costs them opportunities. It's not about knowledge, it's about the emotional associations you've built. The shift happens when you flip those associations. When you make comfort painful and growth pleasurable, everything changes. When the idea of staying stuck hurts more than the idea of stepping up, then you'll move. Until then, comfort wins. The second reason most people stay stuck is fear. But not just any fear, it's the fear of failure. And fear of failure is one of the greatest illusions in life. Because think about it, what is failure? It's just an interpretation. It's feedback, it's a step in the process. The most successful people in the world aren't the ones who avoid failure. They're the ones who have failed more times than anyone else because they're willing to take more shots. But the 99%, they spend their lives avoiding failure. They'd rather shrink their goals down to something safe and achievable than risk going after something that could change their entire life but might not work out. Fear of failure kills more dreams than failure itself ever could. People won't start the business because they're afraid it won't succeed. They won't go after the relationship they want because they're afraid of rejection. They won't put themselves out there because they're afraid of looking stupid. And what they don't realize is that they're already failing. They're failing by default because they're living a life that's less than what they're capable of. The pain of regret is always greater than the pain of failure, but most people don't feel that regret until it's too late. They wake up at 60, 70, 80 years old and realize they traded decades of possibility for the illusion of safety. Here's the truth, there is no such thing as failure. The only failure is never trying. Every attempt, every stumble, every so-called failure is just data, it's feedback, it's showing you what doesn't work so you can find what does. But most people are so paralyzed by the idea of failing that they never even step into the arena. They spend their lives in the stands watching other people play the game, convincing themselves that safety is better when in reality they're slowly dying inside. Fear is a pattern, and patterns can be broken. But to break it, you have to condition your nervous system to see fear differently. Fear is not a stop sign, it's a signal, it's energy. The same fear that keeps you stuck is the same energy that, if redirected, can drive you to perform at your highest level. Fear is not the enemy. Avoidance is the enemy, because avoidance makes the fear grow. Whatever you avoid controls you. Whatever you face, you take power back from. So ask yourself, what are you more afraid of? Failing or regretting that you never even tried? Most people say failure, but the people who break free, the ones who create lives of impact, freedom, abundance, they fear regret far more. They know that failure is temporary, but regret is permanent. They use that fear of regret to fuel action. They let it burn inside them, push them, drive them. And once you shift your fear from failure to regret, your whole psychology changes. Suddenly taking action isn't optional, it's a must. Most people stay stuck because their entire life is built around avoiding pain in the short term rather than pursuing meaning in the long term. They live in comfort, which slowly kills their hunger. And they live in fear of failure, which keeps them from ever truly playing the game. That's why 99% of people live lives of quiet desperation, talking about what they want, but never demanding it from themselves. Because comfort and fear are stronger than their vision. Until you break that pattern, until you condition your nervous system to embrace growth over comfort and regret over failure, you'll always stay stuck where you are. The real reason most people don't break through isn't because they're incapable. It's because their standards are negotiable. Every one of us has a set of standards, whether we realize it or not. We don't always get what we want in life, but we do get what we tolerate. If you tolerate being exhausted all the time, you'll keep living that way. If you tolerate financial struggle, it will persist. If you tolerate shallow relationships, that's what you keep experiencing. People rarely rise to the level of their goals, they fall to the level of their standards. Think about it. Someone says they want to be fit, but their standard is, I work out when I feel like it. That's not a standard, that's a wish. Or someone says they want to build wealth, but their standard is, I'll try to save a little when it's convenient. That's not a standard, that's a hope. A true standard is non-negotiable. It's the line you refuse to cross. It's the rule you set for yourself that you will not violate. Successful people, the 1%, they have higher standards for themselves than anyone else's for them. They decide what they will no longer accept in their life, and that decision reshapes their identity. See, the identity you hold is built on your standards. If your standard is, I'll always find a way, you'll always find a way. If your standard is, I never miss a workout, then no matter what's going on, you'll keep your body in peak state. But if your standards are weak, if they're flexible, if they can be negotiated with, then in moments of stress or temptation, you'll fold. And the truth is, people negotiate with themselves far more than they negotiate with others. They say they're going to get up at 6, but when the alarm rings, they negotiate just 10 more minutes. They say they're going to make those calls, but then they negotiate, I'll do it tomorrow. They say they're going to eat clean, but then they negotiate with a piece of cake. It's just this once. And those negotiations compound into mediocrity. Why do people lower their standards? Because raising your standards requires pain. It requires discipline. It requires saying no to things that are easy and saying yes to things that are demanding. And most people are addicted to comfort, addicted to ease, addicted to what feels good in the moment. But if you look at anyone who has achieved at the highest level, their standards were ruthless. They demanded from themselves what no one else would. That's why champions practice when no one is watching. That's why entrepreneurs push when the world thinks they're crazy. That's why leaders show up consistently, not just when they feel like it. Your life changes the moment you decide that something is no longer acceptable, not, I should change this, not, I'd like to change this, but I must change this, I will never go back. That's the power of raising standards. Because once you truly raise them, your brain finds a way to meet them. You don't have to push yourself. You're pulled by who you've decided you are. That's why the language of should and who to is useless. People don't do their shoulds. They only do their musts. Now, here's the second trap most people fall into. They confuse motion with progress. They think because they're busy, they're moving forward. But business is the greatest illusion of progress. You can run east looking for a sunset. You'll never get there no matter how fast you run. Activity without alignment is wasted energy. Most people spend their days in constant motion, checking boxes, answering emails, attending meetings, scrolling through endless feeds, and at the end of the day, they feel exhausted but not fulfilled. They mistake being busy for being productive, and they mistake productivity for progress. Progress requires clarity. Progress requires knowing exactly where you're going and measuring whether what you're doing is actually moving you there. But people avoid that level of clarity because clarity is uncomfortable. If you have to measure whether your actions are truly making progress, you might have to face the truth that they're not. And so instead, people fill their lives with activity that makes them feel significant in the moment, but doesn't create real change. They'd rather feel busy than feel uncertain. They'd rather feel stressed than feel lost. Business is a drug. It numbs the deeper question of, am I really moving forward? Real progress comes from doing fewer things with more intensity and more alignment. It's not about doing more, it's about doing what matters most. But that requires the discipline of saying no. And people hate saying no. They say yes to everything because it feels good to be needed. It feels good to be important. It feels good to be busy. But the people who create extraordinary results are ruthless about their focus. They don't just ask, what should I do? They ask, what must I do that will make everything else easier or irrelevant? The truth is most people are addicted to motion because it protects their ego. If you're busy, you don't have to face the fact that you're not growing. If you're always in motion, you don't have to admit that you're afraid to slow down and look at whether your actions actually matter. But slowing down to evaluate requires courage. It requires honesty. It requires facing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. And that's scary. So instead, people keep spinning, keep grinding, keep running, convincing themselves they're progressing, when deep down, they know they're not. Look at the greats. They're not the busiest people in the world. They're the most focused. They don't confuse activity with achievement. They don't confuse being overwhelmed with being effective. They know that progress is measured not by how much you do, but by how much closer you are to your vision. They measure outcomes, not effort. They know that motion doesn't matter if it's not moving them toward the life they demand of themselves. Most people are stuck because their standards are too low and they keep negotiating with them. And even when they do take action, they confuse business with progress. They live lives of constant activity but little true movement. They measure their days by how much they did instead of who they became, by how many tasks they checked off instead of how much closer they got to their vision. And until they break that pattern, until they raise their standards to the point where there is no negotiation and align their actions with true progress, they'll stay stuck in the same cycles year after year. Most people are trapped because they allow their environment to dictate their life. They think they are independent, but in reality, they are being conditioned every day by the people they surround themselves with, the media they consume, the culture they live in. Human beings are social creatures, and we adapt unconsciously to the standards of the group around us. If your friends settle, you'll settle. If the people in your circle complain all the time, eventually you'll find yourself complaining. If the people around you normalize mediocrity, you will start to normalize it too, even if deep down you know you were made for more. That's why it's said you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Your environment is constantly shaping your standards, your beliefs, your energy. And yet most people never consciously design their environment. They just accept what's given to them and wonder why they feel stuck. If you want to change your life, you have to take control of your environment. That means surrounding yourself with people who demand more from themselves, people who lift your standards just by the way they live. It means creating spaces that prime you for energy and focus instead of distraction and weakness. It means feeding your mind with ideas that stretch you instead of messages that numb you. The most successful people don't let their environment dictate them. They dictate their environment. They put themselves in situations that force them to rise. They immerse themselves in rooms that demand growth. They know that if they don't manage their environment, it will manage them, and usually not in a direction they want. The next trap that keeps people stuck is that they chase resources instead of developing resourcefulness. Everyone says, I'd change my life if I had more money, more time, more connections, more knowledge. But that's a story, an excuse. The truth is, resources are never the real problem. History is filled with people who started with nothing and created extraordinary lives. They didn't have the resources. They had resourcefulness. They had hunger. They had creativity. They had persistence. They had the ability to adapt and find a way no matter what. Because when you're resourceful enough, resources show up. People tell themselves they can't start the business because they don't have the funding. They can't pursue their dream because they don't know the right people. They can't get in shape because they don't have the time. Those are excuses disguised as logic. The real question is, how badly do you want it? Because when something is a must, you find a way. When it's just a should, you find an excuse. Resourcefulness is the ultimate resource. It's the mother of all skills. And the truth is, if you can train yourself to be resourceful, to tap into your creativity, to leverage what you do have instead of obsessing about what you don't, you'll always find a way to win. The reason people get stuck isn't just about standards or environment. It's about what's happening inside them. Most people never master their emotional state. They live life like emotional yo-yos, constantly at the mercy of what's happening around them. If circumstances are good, they feel good. If circumstances are bad, they feel bad. They let traffic dictate their state. They let the weather dictate their state. They let other people's moods dictate their state. And when your emotions are controlled by the outside world, you have no power. You're not living, you're reacting. The truth is, your state determines your decisions, and your decisions shape your destiny. When you're in a lousy state, you make lousy choices. When you're in a peak state, you make bold, decisive, powerful choices. That's why mastering your emotions isn't optional. It's the foundation of creating change. But most people don't realize their emotions aren't random. They're patterns, they're habits. And like any habit, they can be trained. If you think about it, emotion is created by motion. The way you use your body, your breath, your focus, your language, those are the levers that generate emotion. If you slump your shoulders, breathe shallow, stare at the ground, and tell yourself everything's hopeless, what are you going to feel? But if you change your posture, breathe deeply, focus on solutions, speak with conviction, you'll create a completely different state. It's not magic, it's conditioning. You can train your nervous system to access empowering states instantly, no matter what's happening around you. And here's the key: when you master your emotional state, you stop waiting for life to give you permission to feel good. You stop waiting for circumstances to line up. You realize you can generate confidence, certainty, gratitude, determination at will. That's real freedom. Because when you control your state, you control your behavior. And when you control your behavior, you control your results. Most people are stuck because they've never been taught how to direct their own emotions. But once you do, everything changes. Intelligence alone is never enough. The world is full of incredibly smart people who can explain why they're not succeeding. They can tell you all the reasons something won't work, all the theories, all the limitations, but what they don't have is hunger. Hunger is the X factor. Hunger is the unstoppable drive that makes someone get back up again and again when they fail. It's the fire that pushes you to do whatever it takes, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how many times you get knocked down. Intelligence without hunger is wasted potential. Hunger without intelligence will still find a way to win, because hunger makes you resourceful, hunger keeps you persistent, hunger makes you learn what you don't know. When you look at the people who've created massive impact, they're not always the most educated, the most connected, or the most talented. But they are the hungriest. They refuse to settle. They live with a sense of urgency. They don't dabble, they commit. Hunger is what drives people to train when no one is watching, to grind when no one believes in them, to push when everything around them says stop. And the thing about hunger is it can't be faked. You either have it or you don't. The good news is you can cultivate it. You can stoke that fire by setting a vision that excites you, by putting yourself in environments that stretch you, by raising your standards so high that nothing less than extraordinary is acceptable. Most people lose because they let their hunger die. They get comfortable, they hit a plateau, they achieve a little success, and then they stop pushing. They forget that hunger has to be fed daily. That's why you see people who were once at the top of their game suddenly fall off. They stop feeding the hunger that got them there. Hunger has to be renewed, because the moment you lose it, you start settling. The other piece that keeps people stuck is the lack of a compelling vision. People underestimate how powerful vision really is. Without vision, people perish. Without vision, you drift. You go through the motions, you check the boxes, you work hard, but it doesn't mean anything because there's nothing pulling you forward. A vision is what gives meaning to the struggle. A vision is what makes the sacrifices worth it. A vision is what pulls you out of bed at 5 a.m. with energy instead of dread. The problem is most people set goals, not visions. A goal is something you check off a list, something you achieve, and then move on from. A vision is bigger than that. It's a future that excites you, a picture of life that's so compelling you can feel it in your gut. It's not about what you think you can get. It's about what you're truly hungry for, what you're willing to fight for, what would light you up even if it seemed impossible. The people who stay stuck don't lack ability. They lack a vision that inspires them enough to move through the pain, the fear, and the uncertainty. When you have a vision that's compelling enough, it doesn't just push you, it pulls you. It becomes magnetic. You don't have to motivate yourself every day because the vision calls you forward. It changes the way you think, the way you act, the way you feel. It gives you purpose. Without it, you'll always settle for distractions, for comfort, for whatever's easy. With it, you'll endure almost anything because you know what it's for. That's why vision isn't just some nice exercise, it's the fuel of transformation. At the end of the day, the truth is simple, but it isn't easy. 99% of people stay stuck because they let fear, comfort, and low standards dictate their lives. They settle for less than what they're capable of, and they tell themselves stories to justify why it's okay. But stories don't change your life, decisions do. And the decisions that shape your destiny are the ones where you finally draw a line in the sand and say, never again. This is my standard now. This is who I am now. This is the life I will no longer negotiate with. You don't have to be the smartest. You don't have to be the most talented. You don't have to have the perfect background, the right family, the ideal circumstances. What you need is hunger. You need vision. You need the ability to raise your standards so high that they scare you, and then condition yourself every single day to live up to them. You need the courage to stop confusing business with progress and start focusing only on what truly matters. You need to stop letting your environment shape you and instead step up to design an environment that forces you to grow. And above all, you need to take command of your emotional state, because if you wait for life to line up before you feel powerful, you'll wait forever. You have to generate that power within yourself right now. The people who break free, the people who make it into that 1%, are not fearless. They feel the fear and they move anyway. They've conditioned themselves to use fear as fuel instead of letting it paralyze them. They're not comfortable. They've trained themselves to love discomfort, to see it as proof that they're expanding. They're not living for resources. They're living from resourcefulness, knowing they can create whatever they need because they refuse to give up. They're not waiting for the world to give them permission to feel confident, certain, alive. They generate it on demand. And they're not dabbling in some vague set of goals. They're driven by a vision so compelling that it pulls them forward through the inevitable obstacles. Ask yourself what's going to matter 5 years from now, 10 years from now. At the end of your life, are you going to wish you played it safe? Or are you going to wish you had the courage to bet on yourself fully? The pain of failure is temporary, but the pain of regret lasts a lifetime. And the moment you start living from that truth, your life changes. Because suddenly fear doesn't control you anymore, regret does. And regret is the one thing you'll do anything to avoid, which means you'll finally move. There's only one question that matters now. Are you going to be part of the 99% who stay stuck, or the 1% who decide that enough is enough? Because your future isn't written yet. It's not in your past, it's in the decision you make right now.